Hello, everybody. Welcome to Docacon 2021. Uh, we'll now have a series of short presentations, some of which are shorter than others. But we'll start out with I'll read out the names of everybody who's going to present. First, we have Scott, who's joined me on the screen. Then we'll have Quentin, and then Bryce, who works with Quentin. Then Michael, then Michelle, then David, and then Toby. We should end shortly before 3, and we'll have some time for questions. Feel free to write questions that you have in the Q&A section. If we have time to address them, we will, or we can save them to the end. And also, although the event is scheduled, was scheduled from 1 to 3, we are keeping the Remo open until 3:30. So if you want to hang out, we're going to go back into the like rooms afterward, and we can chat some more if you have time, or if you have to take off, take off. But without further ado, take it over, Scott.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. All right, so my name is Scott Cummings. That's me. I just a little bit of background about me. I went to the University of Oregon for undergrad. I studied environmental policy and ancient Latin. Then I went to U of O School of Law. So I'm a double duck, as they say. So in law school, just a couple highlights. I externed at the district court here for the District of Oregon. I externed in the Court of Appeals, did law review, all that. And then during both my law school summers, actually, I got to clerk at the law firm that I'm at now, Dwyer Williams Shirkos. There's my boss, Tim Williams. He was the 2020 to 21 president of the Oregon Trial Lawyers Association out here. And that's what I do here at Dwyer Williams Shirkos is I'm a trial attorney. There's my paralegal, Desiree. Megatron is what I call her. So that's her. And at the beginning of this year, 2021, I started watching like Hello World Python tutorials online. And I got sort of a vague idea from there that that there was a more efficient way to practice law. I couldn't figure out how to get Python to do anything, though, let alone, get it to do things that I needed it to do in Microsoft Word or whatever for my practice. And the documentation, as I tried to look into it, it was different than the language I spoke as an attorney or that I was used to. I couldn't figure out, so eventually I just Googled Python for lawyers. I found Docassemble pretty quickly, created my first working program. That was called RFP Maker. You'll get a look at it during this presentation. And so, yeah. Hi, Jonathan. So this presentation, I called it Lawyers or Luddites. Basically, I'll attempt to address some of the most common reasons that lawyers will give to insist on bootstrapping everything, as we like to do. So here's the type of self-congratulatory reasoning that lawyers like to engage in. How can we trust technology or software to do such a complex and sophisticated job like this? And basically the response is like, sure, legal work is complex and sophisticated for sure, but let's not confuse legal work with work that lawyers do. And there's a big difference. And here's a good example. So in litigation, like I said, I'm a trial attorney. a request for production, like the one on the left, comes in, and it comes in as a PDF, by the way. And so an attorney, to preserve her objections, must respond to the request within 30 days, noting her objections. And the request, even though, as you see on the left there, it often leaves a space for the opposing attorney's objections below each request, the attorney can't just respond right on there. The attorney has to create their own document, which you see on the right, and it's got to be in her firm's own style and titled as a response to a request, not as a request. And the response has to reproduce the request, so you got to like copy and paste from the PDF, and then you need to, as I said, respond with your objections to each request. And so lawyers, they come out to practice knowing these rules, but either their law firm imposes a process to respond to these requests to get the document in this format, or they figure it out on their own. And I haven't personally seen any in the wild do it very efficiently. So here's an example. This is Bob. Bob will respond to a recovery or discovery request by creating his own document here. It's a response to a request for production. And then what he does, he copy and paste each request in and from the PDF, and then he types out all of his responses below each request. His objections, to some extent, do read like Hemingway, but at the same time, it just seems like an epic waste of time, Bob, because you just need to preserve your objections. You don't need to write beautiful prose. So, and now here's a different way of approaching it. This is something you might see at a particularly sophisticated and coordinated law firm. The attorney will indicate on a table like this which objections to make by referencing back to this list, this numbered list here. And then the paralegal will come along and put the response together by copying and pasting the request and the attorney's objections below each request. And if your paralegal is a computer whiz, she might actually use something like the autocorrect in Microsoft Word rather than copy pasting each objection. It could be like objection 1, objection 2, just autocorrects to the objection in the list. But that's about as sophisticated as I've seen in the wild. Now, like picking this apart here, this is why I think it's a good illustration is if you look at this this slide here, there's one thing that's on this slide that is an algorithm, and there's one thing on this slide that is basically compute power. And see if you can spot which one it is. Yeah, so the table is the algorithm, and then it goes to the paralegal to process. And I mean, even with Megatron at your side, the best paralegal in the world, the processing speed is going to be subpar with this setup. And all of it, by the way, is going to be super stressful because it's all getting done at the last minute. It doesn't happen any other way at a law firm, at least in my experience. So all this is to say is how much legal work is really going on there. That's a lot of work, but it's very little legal work. And so here's this is the program I was talking about. This is Hello World. It's my very first program, and I don't say that to boast or whatever. I'd say it to express like how easy it is to create a program that will save attorneys a lot of time. And so what it does is you can just upload the PDF to it. It'll take out all the requests and lead the user through one by one, and allow the user to check mark their objections to each request, and then it puts the document together for them. And so basically, in other words, it does the heavy lifting, and it leaves the legal analysis for the lawyer, and that's appropriate. So it leaves in other words, the sophisticated, complex part of the job to the attorney. Yeah, and so you get the same document. So leaving us time to put in the work, making it rain. Okay, well, maybe there's some more concerns out there to address. So won't there be less legal work if we're doing things way more efficiently? That's another common sentiment you'll hear out there. I would push back and say that less grunt work is not less legal work. Sort of as I was just talking about, the legal work should always be left to the attorney. But we don't want to be copy and pasting all day, do we? And we want to do intellectual lawyers work, and that's what clients want to pay us to do. And even if we end up doing less work and we have more free time because of technology, well, it's a capitalist economy. Theoretically, it's constantly expanding, and so I don't see it as being an issue of demand out there. And the existing clients who are getting more value from their attorney they may increase the utilization of services because they're getting a better value, or there may be new market entrants because of a lower price tag, because you're able to do things more efficiently. You're not spending an hour, or you're not billing an hour for copy and paste work. Here's another one. Won't our lawyers just phone it in if they have this software? Well, that's sort of a false dichotomy. The lawyers can phone it in without software, and I've seen it happen. And it isn't as if it's either automate and your attorneys turn their brains off, or have your attorneys do everything by hand. I think in that respect, maybe automation is a misnomer. An automated document, in my opinion, it should be seen as a rough draft. So I don't know what a better name would be, like semi-automatic documents. And then finally, how will our new lawyers learn to do their jobs? Well, so this sort of thing is like, how is an attorney going to learn to do the jobs they don't learn to do it the way that I did, right? And we used to write our objections out in handwriting, and then we used to type them, and then in a typewriter, and mail it at a post office. And that's just not sure. Lawyers of old learned some lessons out of that, and maybe they want to impart that on a younger generation. That's all very admirable, but lawyers and the way that they do their jobs is going to change with the time. It's going to change with technology, and there'll be new lessons to learn out of the way that the lawyers of the new generation process their tasks and leverage technology in the way that they practice. And in my opinion, lawyers do need to adapt and leverage tech to stay relevant. I'll point out, like, not everybody in the world is happy with the profession. Here out in Oregon, there's a big push to license paraprofessionals who are basically going to be able to practice law without a law degree, and of course they'll have a license and everything, but the idea is that it's going to be a cheaper service to do these sort of lower level tasks that people are overpaying, or they're priced out for because of how much lawyers wind up charging them for it. And I think that if lawyers weren't so resistant to leveraging technology, lawyers could meet that need, and I think that is ultimately going to serve the public much better than looking for groups other than lawyers to do legal services, direct legal services. But that's my soapbox. So I think with that, yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, I think we can move on to Quentin's presentation if Quentin's ready.
All right, so I'm joining now. I did the most dangerous thing in the world where I just was working on some code up to the last minute for a demo I'm hoping to do. And now something's installing. I was hoping those extra 5 minutes.
Actually,
I'll have to start anyway. I don't need to do any more coding.
I was actually going to ask, I was like, Scott, I finished a little bit before his time, but I was actually going to ask Scott if you had successfully been able to use optical character recognition on documents.
Yeah, and so that's how the program RFP Maker I was talking about, it uses OCR to pull out the request from the PDF that I received from opposing counsel.
See that? Yeah, that I think people might want to ask you questions about how you actually accomplish that, because that's pretty darn cool. Because it can be so unpredictable what shows up with optical character recognition. I've never even attempted that, so that's pretty awesome. Yeah,
it's really cool. Actually, it's one of the coolest things I've ever done.
Yeah, and I think I remember helping you on Slack because there are all sorts of issues with doing it in a background task because the OCR is kind of time consuming, and if the document's long, it's hard to do. But you really stuck with it, and so now like they don't even have to type it in. So that leads to the possibility of creating applications that allow a defendant to answer a complaint without having to hire a lawyer, because they can even like echo back what each paragraph of the complaint said, and then they can put in their answer. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer, of course. So
right, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, but
so Quentin, are you ready to get going, or is your thing still
ready?
installing?
I switched my multi-camera setup here, so I'm going to be looking at you when I talk. All right. Let's see here. I'm going to try sharing this. All right, you should all see my slides. And now you don't see my camera anymore. Okay, great, just making sure. So today I want to talk with you about the document assembly line, which is a project that we've been doing for the last 1.5 years at Suffolk University Law School. And what we're all about is getting you from this starting point of a paper court form, that is, to a web form, like a DocAssemble app, much more easily. And we've been moving the goalpost for that further and further ahead till I think we have something that's really nice. So started with a call to action. And the call to action came from the Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, who said, what can we do to help serve people during the pandemic when courts are literally physically closed to people walking in? And we, of course, jumped right away to thinking we can offer all those people guided interviews, and they're going to be in DocAssemble because that's what the skill set that I brought with me to Suffolk. I happened to join the same week as the pandemic, actually. So we thought about what can we do to get from this form that's on paper already, that's locked up, that can't be accessed essentially by somebody without printing it, and in most cases getting help from an attorney to do it step by step, to this interactive tool that looks a little bit like the one here on the right. And what we realized was we needed to solve a couple of problems to do that the best way. So one was we had maybe 30 or 40 different processes we wanted to be able to move online. And all of those were, for the most part, paper-only processes. So how could we do that all at once? Because all of those were emergencies by definition. The court was still open to hearing those back in March of 2020. And they did not want to, it was hard to say which one should come first, but we wanted to be able to leverage the work of a lot of volunteers to do that. So we started thinking about it. What if it took a couple of weeks instead of a year to automate a form? I found from working on a lot of these form projects is a year is a pretty good number that it takes to do this. And what if we could avoid reinventing the wheel? What if we didn't have to do as much boilerplate code each time we had a new form that we were working on? Was that a place maybe we could save some time and getting closer to that few weeks instead of a year timeline? What if we could give all of those forms a consistent look and feel? So if someone came and had to do emergency process number 12, they wouldn't have to have a totally different appearance and a different way of interacting with it than emergency form number 1. And what if we were able to divide that workload across a team? So instead of being like 1 or 2 or maybe at best 3 developers who are working on one form at once, we could leverage a lot of volunteers to move this work forward. Turns out we did have a lot of volunteers. So over the course of the project, we had more than 200 people from all over the world who joined in with us. I'm not going to spend too much time talking to you about that part of the process, although I think it's really interesting. And you can learn a little bit more about it on our website. But what we essentially came to was there is an answer to yes to all of those questions. And it looks a lot like turning that work of automating a form into what we called an assembly line. A lot like factory work, right? We figured out how to divide up the work of doing that automation into small steps. And we leveraged those volunteers to help us get some progress on each step of that in a way that was repeatable, that someone could come in and volunteer just for a couple of hours if that's all that they could do, and make a meaningful contribution to moving our form across the finish line and get us closer to the idea of being able to have parallel work across all of those critical forms at once, and to make that work really repeatable, consistent, and high quality. And really, I say what we worked on ended up having some output that I think is really relevant to all of you here in this audience. And we built a whole constellation of tools that I think can be useful to people working on court forms that they're trying to automate, like we were, or any kind of end user facing interactive form that starts with some kind of paper output or has a isometric mapping to some kind of paper output. So we started with thinking about our core is really this idea of having a library of questions that are repeatable and that can be used for things like every form tends to have, maybe makes up about 80% of the content. Things like the names of different people who appear on the form, their addresses, names of courts. We thought about solving some of the problems that come up again and again with us in Docassemble interviews. So we built a class that helps you represent a number of contingent documents that are sometimes, but not always, output to the user, depending on the choices that they make. So we spent a lot of time on back-end engineering to solve some of the more challenging Docassemble roadblocks we ran into. We built the Weaver tool, which is a tool that takes you from a specially prepared paper form, or a PDF or docx representation of it, that is, and takes you directly to a draft, a prototype you can run and interact and play with. And we also have built things like style guides to help, because we needed to be able to help our volunteers make correct and good choices, right? Or at least consistent choices with the rest of our team's choices. So during our meetings, we spent a lot of time thinking about what good choices were, and we wrote those down. And we also drew on research from all around the world about how to write good questions that help users provide good answers when they're trying to use these tools. Along the way, we also thought about some of the Docassemble administration tasks that we had to do. So we built what we call the dashboard, which is just a collection of little tools that help with Docassemble administration. Things like testing interview files to make sure that they're valid and helping find errors more quickly, errors in templates and so on. And then we also have our toolbox, which we've called a way to collect some of the utility code that we've written that we think you could use without having to use the rest of our tools. And then later you'll hear from Bryce, who's going to talk about the e-filing work that we've done in the last year, and also from Michelle, who's part of our team. We did a lot of great work with automating testing to help us to that high quality side of the picture. I want to just highlight for you a couple of features of these tools and what they look like. So here's a screenshot of one of our forms that's live that I think is a pretty high quality example. So you can see a couple of different components that are built into all of the tools. So here, this is an interview on our development site. So you can see we've highlighted the ID and the version information for testers to be able to quickly give us feedback. And must be able to quickly go and see what screen the feedback that they're giving us is on. We have this feature to let someone jump forward in the interview, save their state, and then jump forward to a saved state to help test things without having to start from the beginning each time. That's just a development feature right now because there's a number of limits to that, but already it saves a lot of time for our testers. We did some work to restyle and make a little bit less prominent and more consistent the read aloud feature DocAssemble offers. We did some work to help make generating a review screen where someone can edit their answers easier to do. We've added these 3 buttons, which I won't go into, but you can see there's a share button that lets someone share by text message or email, either a link to their interview in progress or to let someone else just know this interview exists. You could use it for your own process. An about screen, which lets someone see the version information even if they're not on the development site, and also a feedback form that lets someone give us feedback on any page of the interview. And the nice thing about that feedback form is that it goes right to creating an issue on our GitHub repository, so we can get notified when someone has some information for us to act on. Here's what some of the customized screens that we've created that are standardized look like. So here's like a name field, an address field, a birth date, and then here we have an example of a question asking about gender. So those are some of the screens we standardized and had a consistent way we wanted them to be asked about in interviews. And the next piece of this is what I mentioned, the Weaver. So this is, I like this slide. It started to make me laugh, but the idea here is there's so much of generating a guided interview that's repetitive. So why can't we automate that too? And that is the Weaver tool. That's exactly what it's about. Let me see. I'm noticing the time. I want to show you this cool demo that I spent all morning trying to make even cooler. So let me stop this share here. And OK, great. So you're going to be able to see something else really neat that my colleague David has been working on, which is the Form Explorer. This is a next step for Suffolk. And it's a part of our project that we're looking to find new partners for. So especially if you're in legal aid or in courts in the United States, our funders interested in helping us validate and test this idea, which is to let people get insights into the forms that they have in their jurisdiction, and then take some actions on that insight. So we pulled in all of the forms from a couple of different states. You can see here we have California, Maine, Michigan, and Utah are some states we're already working with here. Something neat you can do is to see this. This is a nice visualization, I think, here. So you can see groups of similarities of forms. What I'm going to show you is just how our Weaver tool works with one of these forms that's been pre-processed here on this page. So these are forms that just had, let me see.
Quentin?
I should probably do a really carefully chosen example.
Quentin?
Yeah.
We can't see your screen. We're only seeing the
can't see my
Docacon
screen.
2021 Google Slides page still.
Thank you. I appreciate you telling me that. I'm going to do a new share. Right. I'm just going to do screen 1 here. All right. So you missed a little bit of that, but here's the really interesting part. So, OK, here's the Form Explorer pulled up for one form. Here is what I was talking about before with the similar forms, this visualization, which is just grouping essentially all of the forms that are in this category inside this state. But what I wanted to do is show you the list view here, where I can see all of the forms. There's some generalized statistics that you can see about the forms. And then we can also jump into one of them and learn a little bit more specifically about that form. So here's some of the statistics we can pull in: page number, number of fields, average grade level. We've given this a taxonomy location using the Spot tool, which some of you might be familiar with already, which basically looks at the text of the page and classifies it into a category. I don't remember what CO. I can open this and tell you actually. So it's saying this is going to court and dealing with procedures. That's a bit general, but probably about right for notice of appeal. You can see we've taken those field names that are in the PDF and normalized them to meet those are all valid Docassemble variable names now. And I'm going into Bryce's time a little bit. Hopefully that's okay since we're working together as a team. But I'm going to show you what I just spent some time working on today. All right. So normally the Weaver is a step-by-step process where you would kind of take your labeled document, like this one here, right? So this is a document that has a lot of empty form fields in it already. That's a labeled document. And then you would go through and go screen by screen to assign those fields to Docassemble pages of the Docassemble interview. But I'm going to try this I'm feeling lucky button now, which is using some of the information that came from this Form Explorer. And we'll see how this works. Chances are it's going to break. It's the curse of the live demo. Building some anticipation. All right, so it's created a Docassemble interview for me now. So you can see here's the YAML code for this, which is relatively readable. As you should be able to look at it and see and understand what's going on in every part of this. So it's not like a standard no-code tool, which usually generates unusable code. I can actually install this right from here inside the Weaver. And this part also takes a minute or so. And let's see. OK, so this is pretty good. Relatively fast here. That gives me classification and also the title of the form and the state. So that's metadata that's being sent over to help with this I'm feeling lucky button. So right now it's taking a minute or two to install it on the server. And we can slow down and look at this code again, but it'd be nice to have that little aha moment of it actually running interactively. So hopefully that happens soon. If not, I think I have one that I prepared earlier, which we could run. So yeah, let me try that. All right. So we're going to run a totally different interview now than the one I just, but it was one built with that same I'm feeling lucky process. So something we can do from running this interactively is to use like a classifier here. And we actually have built a lot of the pieces automatically in a reasonable way. So this is an introduction screen. These are some of the other built-in screens we have. And then it's decided by looking at the fields that were on the form, it's grouped them and classed into a way that made sense to it based on semantic similarity. And we can start to see some of the things you might need to provide. So these were checkbox fields, so they get turned into checkbox fields here. And something we think will get better and better over time. But you can see once we start to get to the questions that are automatically built in by us, things like the address, they're very meaningful and much more thoughtful. The idea here is to take you to that useful prototype stage, not to be a replacement for your judgment and insight, just to help you with giving you something you can interact with and explore and then start to improve and refine. So I should probably let Bryce hop on here. So here's my draft of my filled in form. I click next, I can go ahead and sign it. And notice how little I did to get to this. And I can start to really think about what's going to be needed to improve it just by being able to run it interactively like this. There's a lot of benefit we get from that. And here's the download screen, which is another standardized component that we built. All right, so went over, but I'd love to use some time after in the interactive section to talk with the rest of you about this. So.
Cool. Thanks, Quentin. Let me now share my presentation. There we go. So, so thanks, Quentin, for the introduction and for taking a lot of time to explain what the assembly line is, so I don't have to repeat. But specifically, as Quentin mentioned, the assembly line has done a lot of work into making it really easy for you, a legal guided interview author, to make quick prototypes and to have a lot of additional features that you don't have to worry about. So your people using those guided forms can do them very, very simply. So why specifically focus on e-filing? Because that's still a big part of what someone who's going through a guided form has to do. In this case, without e-filing, someone would have to go through a guided form, get to the end, print out their documents if they have a printer at all, and then they'd have to take time to go to the court, find the right clerk to go to bring their forms, and then after that, that might take like several hours at least, having to wait in line to do all those things. And so adding e-filing to the guided form itself lets them actually e-file wherever they are without having to go to court. And it sort of lowers the bar of access for a lot of self-represented litigants who are trying to get to court to solve their issues. And on the other hand, it also makes things a lot easier for courts. At least in Massachusetts, a lot of the courts are already on electronic docketing systems or electronic case management systems, or are moving to become entirely electronic, meaning all of the information about a court case is already electronic. It's scanned PDFs and that judges can write on with iPads. And so it's easier for the courts if it's already, you can directly e-file instead of someone having to scan in and type in all of this extra information about your case. So everyone likes e-filing if you can get it to work well. So for this particular project, we worked with a few legal aid partners. I think I see Matt Newstead out in the audience. Hi, Matt, who's been invaluable in helping us get work in Illinois. And we also worked with Amanda Brown in Louisiana with the Lagniappe Law Lab. And so specifically our what we wanted to do with this e-filing project was we wanted to have a piece of software that you could use with Docassemble that would be able to file with multiple e-filing systems. So essentially the court side has their own piece of software that handles e-filing requests coming in. And we needed to be able to work with multiple types of that software. So for example, in Illinois, there's their e-filing system is run by Tyler Technologies and uses what's called ECF4, or Electronic Court Filing version 4, which is a sort of a standard for passing information back and forth that use, and so that's what they use in Illinois. And for Louisiana, there isn't a statewide e-filing provider, but there is a specific parish, specifically Jefferson Parish, had sort of homebrewed their own software that we communicated with and worked with to be able to send in some of these requests. So about about January of this year was when we actually started the project in earnest. And our sort of the first a few of this is sort of a bit of the hurdles that I'll probably gloss over a bit was the biggest one being we weren't able to actually find a Python library that could communicate with SOAP, or specifically that ECF uses what's called SOAP, which is just a sort of protocol standard for computers talking to each other. Yeah, and like Jonathan said, it was a popular protocol back in the early aughts, but doesn't have as much software support nowadays. And so all of the Python libraries we found weren't actively maintained, and so we're going to be missing critical security fixes, or simply didn't have the right SOAP features. And SOAP is a very big and kind of unwieldy protocol, and so they were missing features that we needed to talk to the e-filing providers. So we went with our backup, which was Java, and so we have a Java application that's actually doing the communicating with the courts, and so from that we then sort of made sure that this Java application could still easily communicate with Docassemble itself. And so you don't have to worry if you're running this e-filing or this e-filing feature, you don't have to know Java. You just have to be able to know. You can still work entirely in Docassemble. And so our final result was what we call the e-file proxy server. Proxy meaning a piece of software that sits between two other things that are trying to communicate. So in this case, you have your Docassemble server that you want to talk to e-file courts with their e-filing systems, and our proxy server sits in the middle and sort of translates whatever Docassemble wants to talk or wants to send to the courts in the way that the courts can understand it. And so buzzword dump is the proxy server specifically is a Docker-enabled Java server that takes in JSON requests over HTTP or HTTPS if you're running on the broader internet, and then will properly send whatever request is needed. So in this case, for working with Jefferson Parish, we can send HTTP requests to JeffNet, or we can send the proper SOAP requests to Tyler Technologies or anything that's running ECF. And so that's the proxy server sort of sits in the middle, but we also developed a Python library that runs on Docassemble that you can still use to communicate to the proxy server. So you're not having to handwrite raw queries. You can use a Python object much like you would interacting with any other part of Docassemble. We also added some sort of core, like some pre-built question libraries similar to what Quentin showed for the rest of the assembly line, but these are specifically for e-filing. And we wrote an entirely general e-filing interview that no matter the case type or filing type that you want to do with the court, as long as it's working with ECF and specifically Tyler Technologies ECF, then you can use it to make that filing. It's a bit more developer oriented, so it's not the best to throw out to everyone, the general public. But if you're a legal expert or if you're a technical expert, it's a great place to start from there. And integration in your own, assuming assembly line interviews at least, is still very simple. There's 3 blocks of code you need to add. You need to tell us which court you're communicating with. In this case, it's Louisiana. You need to actually somewhere in your interview trigger a check that makes sure that you can e-file, everything is set up properly, and that the user wants to e-file and that they're ready to e-file. And then once you do that, you simply this is a bit of a complicated incantation, but it's really just triggering a Docassemble variable like you would in any other way. That's called e-file, which is a core code block in our section that then does the e-filing for you. I do a demo, but it's literally just a button that you click, and then behind the scenes, the e-filing is made. So it's simple to integrate. And so yeah, now that we've made this e-filing this e-filing feature on top of the assembly line, our next steps are to finish up our certification process. It's been ongoing for a few weeks now. Tyler Technologies has to go through and make sure that we're doing everything right by the books according to their certifications, and that we're accessible to everyone. And so that process is still ongoing. Fingers crossed it will finish soon. We're looking at upgrading to ECF version 5, which is more extensible than ECF version 4, which will be nice. We're also looking at working with additional e-filing managers, or EFMs, EFM systems. So Tyler Technologies with ECF is just one EFM system, and it handles about 22 or so states, but it doesn't handle all of them. There's still a lot of other states that don't use something like Tyler that we're looking into integrating and seeing how we can do that. And then finally, we're interested in community building. And so after all these presentations are over, if anyone wants to find Quentin or myself, and if you want to learn more about it, or even just like have ideas of what you could do with e-filing and what could possibly be done, come see us, and we'd love to work on this. All of this work is open source. I think Quentin's been dropping some links in the library, or links in the chat to the documentation, and that goes to this open source for all of these projects. So that is it. Hopefully I didn't go too much over. I believe it is Michelle's turn.
Actually,
Michelle's.
well, if you want to change the schedule, yeah, I had Michael going up next.
No, sorry. I just didn't know who's next. Sorry.
That's fine. All right, so let me share my screen. And window. All right, so you should all see my screen. My name is Michael Hofrichter. I'm at Legal Server, which is a legal case management system focused on civil legal aid organizations and public defenders. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how I've been able to incorporate DocAssemble in the work that we do at Legal Server. So we've got sort of two different use cases at Legal Server, right? The first is some internal document generation, which is really what I'm going to talk about today. And the second is sort of exploring some integrations with Legal Server. And I've talked about different ways to tie DocAssemble into Legal Server in the past. But one of the really useful projects for us internally that we've started using it for is our onboarding deliverables document. So the onboarding deliverables document is something that we now generate for every client that we see, right? And it sets the guidelines for how long the onboarding process takes, what are all the features that are requested. You can see this little deliverable table example on the right side. What we do, this document, this docx file has 4 or 5 of those, depending on the process, right? Looking at what happens in terms of mapping a client's data into Legal Server and moving it to the different phases and how long everything happens here, and like what to expect from onboarding with Legal Server and deciding that you want to start working with us. And the interesting thing is that we generate this when we're still in the contracting phase of our relationship with our clients, right? So we are sending this as part of our contract, saying like, here, this is what we would be planning on doing. Here's all the details. Now, most of our clients do sign with us, but not every client signs with us. So there's a whole bunch of considerations that go into this, right? And so, right, we wanted to tie in, right? This is our current planning structure in terms of like, when we've got a new client, here's the list of all the different things that we need to do for a new client, right? And we looked at these and went, all right, these are great, but we can't do these when we're generating a deliverable document, even though it's the deliverable document that tells us which of these things we're doing, right? It tells us which tickets are we spinning up in Jira. It tells us what kind of site should we be creating for them, right? Which site do we copy? Do we copy our regular legal aid site? Do we copy a public defender site? Right? We want to, and so all of these sorts of things are happening at the same time that we're generating this document. So the interview that I ended up creating, right, worked with this document, but then also had all of these other features to it. Right? So it was a question of what else is going on, right? And so part of this is that I was able to take our integration with Docassemble and say, look, part of this was tying it to Streak, right, which is our internal client relationship management, right? And part of this was tying this to Jira, and I was able to tie that in as well, right? And you can see I've sort of blocked off those steps that had been in red with what I was able to do. The steps that are in yellow that I just covered up are steps that I'm planning to add to this onboarding interview, but I haven't gotten to yet. But these are just different ways that we're moving this this process internally, right? We wanted to use this onboard deliverable that's going to tell us how to do all these things, and then rather than do all of that stuff manually, right, we can add those automations in to Docassemble. So this involved writing a number of additional Python modules, right, for different things, but right, we were able to reduce it into a couple of different steps, right? So the document first collects some basic information about the client organization and identifies the streak box to later save it there, right? And it also grabs information from sheets about all of the different tables, right? One of the things that I did here is that we didn't want to store the underlying deliverable document in Docassemble, because if I did that, I've got other people who like making edits to these documents. And so the template doesn't actually live in Docassemble, it lives in Google Drive. And then Docassemble now fetches that template, pulls it into Docassemble as a DA file, and then uses that as the basis for the document that's approved. So I was able to take the ability in Docassemble to work through all of these steps, right, and to then take that file, update it, give you the option to make modifications to those tables, offer the standard document, right, and then, as I mentioned before, we've got this gap, right? We've got the gap between, we've got the client who's we're sending this as part of the contract, but we don't want to create the tickets and do all of the work on our end until they've signed and we're ready to go. So we decided to use Slack as our intermediary, right? It's going to post in Slack for us to say, like, hey, when you're ready, come back to this channel that's only used for these and grab this link and continue, right? And that's using that interim level to so that anyone can come back to these, right? We use the multi-user features to turn that on and to be able to return to it. But this way, right, we can still make this accessible to all, right? And then when they grab the link in Slack and finish the second half of the interview, right, it's automating all of these different all of these different lines that would have happened otherwise, right? That would be part of our standard onboarding process, right? It would be the going through and confirming the client name, and then it creates folders in Google Drive for them, and it creates epics and tasks and subtasks in Jira as appropriate. And it links the deliverable document to those epics so that it's there and easily accessible. And then it copies our omnibus planning document into those files. So it puts everything back together so that instead of it taking, like it used to take about an hour to do all of these different setup tasks for all of these clients, and now it's probably going to take 20 minutes. Right? Because all of these rote things are going to be done and assigned and out the door. And then it's, all right, well, I have to capture specific details from this email and do that sort of thing. So the work that is left is much more simple and straightforward for the end user. So here's an example of some of the code that's in that onboarding deliverable document. And then we we ran through it, and right, we set some different stages here, right, to move things along. Right, we were able to take advantage of the tables features uh, uh, in Docassemble to make this really easy to review. And it's pulling all of these fields about the tables from a Google Sheet. So it's pulling that in, it's processing it, it's putting it in a DA list, right, with different columns. And then we made this easy so that if whoever is preparing this can easily edit this by clicking the edit pencil, or they can remove it by clicking the delete button, like to make this simple and straightforward for our end users. Right, and we've got a couple of these, right, where we're building out those details. And then it's also doing some of the math for us, right? Because that's the benefit of these things, where we don't have to think and it'll just automatically fill those out before it generates the document for us. And I've got this where it's first offering up the document, and then it's saving it to Google Drive once it's ready. Right, and the first half of the interview ends at this point, right, where it's saying, like, here's the Google Drive link, and then we've also got this test organization that's waiting for approval before generating our Jira tickets, right, before moving us along to the next set of steps. And then once you finish, right, everything is generated for you, right? It's all there. It's telling us about the onboarding Jira epic, the other epics, where the Google Drive folder is. And you can see that we've already created all the tickets that we need to take this client from the start of the process to go live and beyond, right? And it's this step-by-step process that happened that was really only possible because we could use Docassemble's backend to build out all of these custom steps, right? And so the last 6 months, whenever I had time, was spent building a whole bunch of different Python modules, right, to interact with Jira, to interact with Slack, to interact with Streak and Google. And some of those features that I had to build out were very unique, right? So for example, one of the things that got required in Jira was the fact that, well, we need to confirm that we actually have a valid lookup fields, right? And so some of that needed that extra level of building, but it was certainly doable and possible thanks to Docassemble. So that's it from me. I'm going to turn this over to Michelle, who's next, right, Jonathan?
Correct. And earlier on in the day, Wilson asked in the Q&A, can we create a web form and integrate the data to Salesforce? Well, I think Michael's presentation, while not addressing Salesforce particularly, has shown that you can use Python to call APIs and integrate a whole bunch of different things at the same time. But let's go ahead, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Bernstein, a volunteer programmer with Suffolk Lit Lab's Docassembly Line project. Let me just share my screen here. Not the entire screen. Thank you. There we go. All right, I'm a volunteer with the Docassembly Line project that's already been mentioned by Quentin and Bryce, and with Code for Boston's Clean Slate project for sealing and expunging criminal records. I'm here to talk about how we develop in Docassemble, how we test our work specifically, and ensure its quality and safety. I'll put all the links in the chat together at the end. So I'll be digging into Assembly Line Kiln, a framework for hardening our interviews using automated testing through GitHub specifically. It originates from the Assembly Line project, and it comes with work from both Suffolk Lit Lab and Code for Boston, but it can actually work for any Docassemble interview. And I too will have some references to Quentin, so watch out for those. I think it's some kind of drinking game. Here's a quick sneak peek at our input and output. So, for example, I write a test in my sources folder, and I push it to GitHub. That triggers GitHub to run the tests, and the tests find an error, invalid playground path. And then I see that error report in GitHub, or I can download it to my computer. There's a little this framework can help you do right from the start of your development, and more it can do once your code has stabilized, and we'll get into that. I don't really know you well though, and I'm not sure how you feel about testing, so I'm going to go back to basics for a second. First of all, why do we test at all? Manually or automatically or whatever. So first of all, you might want to avoid pain for your users. Getting an impassable error 2/3 of the way through a 2-hour form is a pretty rough experience. Safety might be a concern. If the form is filled out incorrectly and an address isn't impounded, will the user be put in danger? Establishing trust might be a priority. When things go wrong, users lose trust pretty easily, and it's hard to gain it back. Next, how do we test our work now? I hope that convinced you to test, but we'll assume. How do we test our work currently in Docassemble? In my experience, as I develop, I need to test it bit by bit during development, going back and forth between the playground and the interview. When I'm done, I need to make sure I test all the possible paths my users might take and make sure the results are what I want them to be, and I try to test thoroughly. So I know this is video, but play along with me. Raise your hand if you do the same. Very good. You can put your hands down now. Now raise your hand if you do that by testing by hand. Exactly. Also, if you didn't raise your hand for that one, get at me after class. I want to hear your story. So there is another way. This video isn't sped up, it's slowed down. This is a computer pretending to be a human filling out a form. It's a robot. It's testing Suffolk Lit Lab's 209A Massachusetts restraining order. Usually this part's invisible. It's still early days for this tool, so just be a little less impressed than however impressed you are now. If you use good practices to write your interviews, you can run them in multiple languages. This is a clip of Massachusetts defense eviction form developed by Quentin with Greater Boston Legal Services. And as you can see, it is not in English. All right, that slide again. All right, so these tests run every time we push a package to GitHub, or we can trigger them on GitHub manually with a couple clicks. So that's pretty, but why not just keep testing by hand? First of all, you can. In fact, Quentin's added a snapshot feature to our assembly line tool set that can help speed up your manual tests that I think he talked about earlier. He's also created a translation checker, which can help you find some kinds of common problems with your translation spreadsheets. But that doesn't change the basic nature of manual testing. Manual testing can get complex as the number of interviews you have grows, or as you make longer, more complex interviews with many branching paths, and those especially take time and focus to go through thoroughly. The tests end up being way too much of a time sink to do regularly, so they end up not getting done often enough, and it just doesn't scale well. So how would automating help? So when I'm first developing, like I said, I want to make sure that everything is working as I fiddle with it. And there's a little test for the very basics of that. And afterwards, I want to make sure that all the paths work, that translators don't accidentally translate a variable name, breaking pages. Also, Docassemble is pretty reliable, but with automated testing, it can help give you peace of mind when there's a big Docassemble server version update and you want to make sure things are working, or you change the order of questions, or you just edit text that uses some variables. Might mix things up for the interviews a bit. And that's a lot of work to do by hand that thoroughly. So when would you use automated tests? What part of the process? So one very specific test you can do right from the start. I have often forgotten to add a template file to my interview that was needed. Get a pretty little error message, which I very much appreciate from Docassemble. But right from the start, you can add a really simple test to your package that just makes sure that the interview loads at all. And you can get an error report from that in GitHub. So the way this framework is written now, though, it's currently most useful for stable code. And now, if your brain is fried, you can stop paying attention. There's time left, I think. Oh, it's a bit over time, but I'm going to take a couple seconds. I might skip some slides. We'll see. I'm going to throw in some details for folks who are more familiar with this already or who just like details. I'm going to show some example steps from test scripts that might be in your sources folder. In that script, you can tell a test what values to put in what various interview fields by writing magical sentences called steps that we've made custom for this framework. For example, go to the correct interview. Check the checkbox for the variable Massachusetts has Massachusetts juvenile records, and you say that by selecting true. You can tap to continue. You can make sure you're on the right page with the question ID, and you can download a file. That's just an example of some steps. For now, the developer has to manually check the file for correctness. It doesn't do it automatically. It's something we're talking about. You might have noticed, though, that this would go through the form in a linear order. If you change the order of questions, you'd have to update the test too, and that's a lot of work. But if you're willing and able to get a little bit more complicated, you can make sure that you don't have to edit the test just to change the order of questions. Here, it's all specifying the variable name and the variable value. As long as the interview doesn't error, it doesn't correctly catch an error, this will pass no matter the order of questions. All right. So you don't have to build each test from scratch. You can build new tests by iterating on old ones. You can copy the test from one file and paste it into another and change just the values you need to. And like a phoenix, a new test arises from the old. We're thinking of lots of future features that come to my table we can discuss, like checking documents, comparing documents to make sure they came out correctly. We are also working on updating our test generator that lets you use a simple interviews variables JSON to more easily create a test automatically. So right now the framework is down, I have to add, because of the Bootstrap update. We're expecting to be running up again in a week or two. We have an interview that can help you set up your repository or organization for testing, though. And we also have some preliminary documentation about writing tests, and you can check out our repository as well. And I'll put those links in chat. And there's so much else, caveats and features. If this is something you find important, let us know. The more we hear from folks, the more there seems to be interest in this, the more resources it's worth putting into it. And maybe what I've described isn't what you need. For example, maybe GitHub is a deal breaker. We want to know what would you want testing to look like for your interviews or for your organization. My table is at the bottom right of center when we come out to the tables. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't know how to stop this thing. All right, cool.
All right, up next is David. And while David's joining, I'll just add that I got into the automated testing thing using the same system that Michelle was talking about. And I found it to be a very transferable skill, because once I figured out how to do that, I was then figured out how to automate talking to my case management system and getting it to do things by writing human readable code, and also just ordinary web scraping and web filling if you want to automate some external website. So I've been able to write docassemble interviews that bring in information from third-party websites and go into a background task and yank information out. But I will turn it over to David, who is now sharing his screen.
Thank you for having me. We're going to be talking about a little bit of theming Docacon. For the entire presentation, you can get access to the presentation with the link at the bottom left there. And you want the theme because you want to distinguish your brand from another brand. You want to customize the experience. You want people to feel confident because of just how it's presented. So
David, I'm seeing your screen as black at the moment. I don't know if you
that
shared the right
I'm
thing.
going to be covering in this presentation. And just so you know, I'm David Bain. I consider myself a recovering technologist. I am a business designer, so I use technology and design as a superpower. And I design and launch new products and services. For example, SembleHost, which is Docassemble hosting. And also work with customers to launch new stuff. So a theme in Docassemble is, as it's a web framework, it's a cascading style sheet. And a cascading style sheet, for those who don't know, it's basically a list of rules that control how the finished site looks, and sometimes a little bit how the site behaves. Now, depending on how complex things get, your style sheets and rules can start to look like this. So in Docassemble,
We're not able to see your screen.
to save,
David, we're not able to see your screen right now.
Hey, David, can you hear us?
Docassemble uses rules called Bootstrap. So it's a collection of rules that are tested, and they're used for types of buttons, text styles, colors, and other things. So instead of from scratch, there are a lot of reusable rules which you can just change styles around those rules.
Hi, David, if you can hear us, we can't see your screen. It's all black.
Hold on a second. I might a message in Slack to suggest that they can't hear me. Let me see.
We
Oh,
can
you
hear
can't
you.
see
We
my
just can't see your
screen.
screen.
I'm so sorry. Let me see if I can fix that. So let's try that again. So I've been talking and all you've been seeing is a picture. Let's try that again. Okay. Let me turn off my camera and just focus on the screen share. See if you can see it now. Okay, so I think the key ideas, you don't necessarily need to see these slides for these ideas, so I'll just move on. Great, everybody's seeing now. As we were saying, Docassemble is powered by Bootstrap, and in fact, there are websites where you can get ready-made Bootstrap style sheets. And so you can take the Bootstrap style sheets and apply them to your Docassemble websites. And it looks something like this. You'd visit in this case, the Bootswatch site. You'd select the style sheet that you want. You click download. One important thing, I recommend that when you download the file, you rename it, because every one of these themes, when you download it, it's called bootstrap.something. So I renamed mine to simplex.css. So I know it's the simplex theme. And then the next step is simply to upload your CSS. And in this case, for simplicity, I'm using the playground, the Docassembly playground. Later on, you can package it as you like. So if you're looking at step 2 here, what happens is you choose your file and then you upload your file. Now, this is really just for convenience. It helps when you're doing theme development, because now you can get a path from your playground, and in the Docassembly config, which is through the web, you click your profile as an administrator and click configuration. In that configuration file, you can add that simplex CSS file. And the result is that, sorry, this is just to show you, just to help you to situate where everything is. I just wanted to point out that if you did click on the simplex CSS file, you could find the path, and then you can use that path in the configuration file. Once you've done that and you click update, it's going to restart the system. It's going to take a little bit of time, but once that's done, you'll start to see some new fonts and some new colors and stuff like that. Once you've added the theme, the next, or the CSS, you may want to change your logo as well. In this example, I will upload the logo to the static files in the playground, save them again, retrieve the address. In this case, this is the address of my theme. You'll notice that in the configuration file, there is an option that you can add called main page logo. So you just add this little line of configuration, save, and the result will be a new logo at the top of your site. So great, now we have a logo. You can even add a custom footer. And in this case, my simple example, I have added a little bit of HTML code, which is based on Bootstrap. Actually, this example may not be based on Bootstrap, but I put that code in my footer, and I use global footer, but you can also use main page footer. It depends. Main page footer will show up in the context of interviews. Global footer should show up everywhere. Either way, you put that information there, save the configuration, and you get a new footer, which I can show you shortly. Once you've got your footer added, you may want to add a landing page. And in this case, this is how I found a way to do it. It's just simply doing an interview that contains HTML. And I'll show you that by sharing my screen with my live installation. So let me just jump over to the live installation. Just a second. Okay, great. So on my live site, you'll see that I have a footer here. And I've already clicked save for the sake of time. And you'll see at the bottom here, there is a footer, but there is a little bit of a problem. The problem right now is that my footer is white, so you can't see anything. It's light. So I'm just going to do a quick fix, and this will also give you a little bit of hands-on. So as you can see, there's a style called the footer, and it's possible to set the footer to something like background color, like some kind of dark gray. And what that should do is show the footer, except it's not working because of what is called CSS specificity. So I need to be a little more specific, and I'll add a little bit of padding, maybe 20 pixels all around. And now we have our footer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this code, and you remember that we have our stuff in the playground. We had uploaded our stuff to the static files of the playground. If I already have something called custom CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that custom code. I don't need this part so much. So that's just a little rule that is saying add this capability to the footer, make it dark, and give it a little bit of padding. And when I click save and go back to my home page, what should happen is dark color should persist. So let's see if it's persisting now. Not yet. I think that's called the demo gods or something like that. Maybe my save didn't work. But I'm going to wrap up because I did have 7 minutes. So just to wrap up the last couple of things that you want to be aware of with theming, I'm just going to share my slides one more time so you can see that. You can disable debug mode, and that will get rid of the little source link. That's a useful tip. You can download the package. That's also useful if you want to distribute the package. And these are all in the notes, which you can capture from this address. And this is my last slide. I think these are some steps that you can take next. You're going to want to look into configuration and learn how to add favicons and social metadata. And eventually you want to be able to manage your theme through Git. And if you need a sandbox, you can grab a hosting package from Semblehost. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And we're running a little bit behind. Sorry about that. So Toby has 10 minutes. So if you can stay on just an extra 4 minutes to give him his full 10 minutes, we can end at 3:04. And then we'll go back to the conversation room if you have time to stay. All right, take it away, Toby.
Great, thank you. And I'll try to go as quick as I can. So let me share my screen. My name's Toby Fay. I was a legal aid lawyer for 15 years. And that's how I found Docasymble, to try to meet the need we're so far from meeting. And now I work with Docasymble, and I think it's crucial to the rule of law, our best chance at realizing the rule of law. The rule of law is the idea that no one is above the law, even the people who make the law, enforce the law, or interpret the law. And it's necessary for legitimacy, and people are much more likely to comply with the law if they feel like they're treated fairly. So the technology we've been using for the last 1,000 years, 1,500 years or so, is the common law, which I'm just going to describe really broadly and simply. It's basically you make a decision, you write it down, then you read it again to help make those decisions in the future. This way, it builds the law out of individual cases, and that's an important part because people feel like a lot of research has shown people feel like they're treated fairly when they have voice and when they're heard, and so a court needs to apply, a judge or a jury needs to apply an abstract law in an individual situation. And I'm just going to use the words that Blackstone used 500 years ago, 400 years ago to describe the law. So writing it down is how we make open law, and then applying it, reading it again, trying to follow it creates the uniform law. So how are we doing with that? So here I just grabbed a recent eviction decision, and so if you can't see it, it says triangle argued pi agreed to accept a lesser amount. That's the decision. It doesn't say anything about what the court says about that, just granted possession. But we are achieving the uniformity, at least. Pretty uniformly, people lose when they don't have an attorney. This is from Hamilton County in Cincinnati. So we're feeling it, the openness of law, but we're getting some uniform results, not based on facts, not based on law, but based on whether someone can afford an attorney. So that's why we need to use technology to try to help us realize the rule of law. So there's a lot of attempts to use technology to make better decisions, tell you if someone's safe to give bail to, or if there's fraud in benefits cases. And that is extremely problematic because if it's deep learning, we may not know what the decisions are. And in that case, it's not even law. And a formula isn't going to allow people to feel heard. And who knows if the law is uniform if we put cases in a black box like arbitration instead of our courts. So I think a better thing to do, and what so many people here have done, is focus on using technology to improve the openness of the law. And that's something in other areas we've had a huge amount of success with. We don't have flying cars, but we do have the World Wide Web, which can provide us with so much information about all kinds of topics. And the people and organizations that brought you the World Wide Web have a process in place, a toolkit to create shared information that's not only human readable like the web, but also machine readable, that can allow us to use this huge amount of information. Are the slides not shown? So the W3C calls this the semantic web stack, which a bunch of different tools that when used can make data machine readable and allow all kinds of different ways to access that data, make it easier for people to understand. And we have the semantic, there's already been a lot of work done for law to take these concepts and apply them to law. So laws and cases can be written up in XML using a Comanitoso and are written up here in the United States. Some federal codes written with the USLM. David Colarusso and Margaret Hagan, who's here today, and Margaret Hagan developed the legal issues taxonomy from an earlier version. And the Sally Alliance has created an ontology for legal matters specification standard called LMSS. But I know what you're saying is like, I'm talking about how law needs to be open, and so why use all this stuff that is so confusing? and a bunch of, that's where Docasymble comes in. It can be the user application to allow people to use the semantic web without, with using Python libraries like RDF Lib and Already too, and Matt Carey's Legislice. Without it will allow people to use this semantic web without ever thinking about it or even knowing what it is. So I'll just show a little bit of an example. So we can use Docasymble to edit something like the list, to navigate it, and to use the topics in list to create interviews. So, and I'll just show you a source. So this is pulling from list the 20 main topics. And as you can see here, this isn't in Docasymble. This is pulled from the RDF of list. And then what you can do is edit. You think, I think one reason why this can work so well is because you thinking about the law and objects is a lot very similar to thinking about is how we do legal thinking, is we break stuff down to the smallest elements. And that's what we can do, is we can edit specific legal issues, elements, facts. We can add questions that will help us create interviews. We can add headings or other information for documents. And we can do that outside of the computer even. Like we could have group meetings where people can write ideas down, write good ways to ask questions without having to know computers. So, and then the interviews can be built from the RDF from the RDF way we're storing our information. So again, you see this is not in Docasymble. The Docasymble is just a simple placeholder, and the information is filled. The content is provided in our RDF that's pulled in, which also makes it easy to edit all the questions and fix stuff up, and Docasymble has all kinds of features for individual questions. So I don't want to go too long, and I hope to talk to people more about this at the tables. Thanks.
All right, thank you all of the presenters. If you have time, I'm going to turn off presentation mode, and we can hopefully go back to tables to do any follow-up conversations. But if you have to take off, thanks a lot for coming. Here we go.